Hello, everyone. I'm Sadie Otte. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm faculty co-director of the Center for Teaching and Learning. This is a presentation about inviting the student voice with mid-semester feedback. First, I'd like to acknowledge that the Claremont colleges exist on Indigenous land, specifically the Tongva territory. We are grateful to teach and learn on these lands. This land acknowledgement is one small act in the ongoing process of working to be in good relationship with the land and the people of the land. First, I'm going to go over some definitions and give literature findings about mid-semester feedback. That's where the recording will end, but in the in-person workshop, we will then share experiences, brainstorm questions, discuss related topics possibly. So first of all, what is mid-semester feedback? Mid-semester feedback is one kind of formative teaching evaluations, and formative teaching evaluations give instructors the opportunity to monitor student learning and gather feedback to improve their teaching. To contrast, the primary goal of summative teaching evaluations, such as end-of-course evaluation forms, is to measure instructors' teaching effectiveness to guide personnel decisions. So there are several kinds of formative teaching evaluations, one of which is minute papers or exit tickets. Another is mid-semester feedback forms. So to briefly touch on minute papers and exit tickets, one way to do this is basically at the end of class, you ask students to very briefly answer one question anonymously. So some questions you could ask are, what is the most significant or useful, etc., thing that you learned today? Is there anything you didn't understand from today's class? What questions are on your mind? Or what was the muddiest point during today's class? And this was actually introduced to me as called the muddiest point activity. And the way that I've used it was during a honors organic chemistry lecture class. At the end of every class period, the students just filled out an index card with the muddiest point. So basically, what was the one thing that they found the least clear from the lecture? And then I would go through and basically answer those questions after class and then send those out to the students. So there's a few different ways you can do that, but that's one way that I've done. Mid-semester feedback forms are a different kind of formative teaching evaluation and also the focus of this presentation. So most basically, you ask students to fill out a short survey form during the middle of the term. To encourage students to answer honestly, the surveys should be anonymous. And to ensure maximum participation, you'll want to set aside a few minutes during class to fill out the questionnaire. A little note here, the phrase student evaluations of teaching, which is a very common phrase, has been criticized in recent years, and some argue that students aren't experts in evaluating teaching, but instead are highly capable of reflecting on their own experience. Therefore, alternative language has been suggested, such as student feedback or student ratings. I will use student feedback in this presentation. Okay, so first question, why should we use formative feedback? And so there's several reasons. Oops. The first of which is that you can gather information that you can use to make adjustments during a course and course correct, something that cannot be done using end of course evaluations. At that point, it's too late and you can only improve for future classes, not the class that you're teaching during that same semester. Formative evaluations also allow instructors the opportunity to gather feedback on their teaching without having to share it with one's department colleagues or reappointment, promotion, or tenure committees. And another reason is that as students respond to formative teaching evaluations, they think about their own learning, and this metacognition contributes to their self-awareness as learners and helps them better engage with their learning. So we're going to go through each of these points in more depth in a moment. I didn't want to pass up the chance, though, to show this excellent figure again. So basically, the idea here is that there's a learning cycle. And reflection is a necessary piece in order for students to get deep learning. And so I try to never pass up the chance to get more reflection. And metacognition is just a specific kind of reflection, which is a way of thinking about one's thinking in order to grow. All right, so first of all, the evidence that student feedback can be used to improve teaching. So first of all, is student feedback even accurate would be a question. So it turns out that studies have shown that student ratings are significantly and consistently related to student achievement, so how well students do in the class, teacher self-ratings, so how well faculty think that they're actually doing at teaching the class, ratings by alums, so several years down the line, how do students look back upon the class, administrator and colleague ratings, so if a colleague sits in on a class, their ratings are related to student ratings, as well as ratings by trained observers. So kind of the same, except in this case, not just a colleague, but a trained colleague. Additionally, students' written comments and objective grading scales are also highly correlated. So all of this together doesn't prove that student feedback improves teaching, but it might be a little bit comforting to some. A study by Overall found that students whose instructors received feedback performed significantly better on a standardized final exam in a computer programming course. They were also more positive about feelings of course mastery, and this effect did not depend on prior ability in the subject. So in this case, instructors who received this mid-semester feedback had students who did better, which seems a pretty good argument that mid-semester feedback does improve teaching. Additionally, students whose instructors received midterm feedback gave more favorable responses to affective outcome items. So in particular, whether they plan to pursue further coursework in the subject or they plan to join the local computer club. And again, this effect did not depend on students' prior ability in the subject. So if you want students to remain in your discipline and perhaps become majors, it seems like mid-semester feedback could be a good way to do that. The second part is that the process is enhanced when paired with consultation about those evaluations. I was actually quite surprised when I looked at the data on this to find how big of an effect this was, but it turns out that student feedback plus expert consultation leads to greater improvement in teaching than student feedback alone. And when student feedback was combined with expert consultation, the effects persisted for as long as 10 years. So making this investment to seek out this expert consultation could have very, very long-lasting effects on your teaching effectiveness. All right, and so the next piece is mid-semester evaluations can change the way that students perceive the course and the instructor. So in this study by Brown, participants, in this case, this is students, believed that end of semester feedback is a valid measure of teaching. However, they had doubts about whether students or instructors actually take the feedback seriously. On the other hand, the participants had very positive perceptions of mid-semester feedback and instructors who conduct them. Furthermore, completing a mid-semester feedback form positively affected perceptions of the instructor's responsibility, commitment to teaching, and desire for the class to do well. And I would expect that all of us do feel very responsible toward our students, have a strong commitment to teaching, and desire the class to do well, but that doesn't always come across. And this can be one way to help students kind of recognize those things. Another reason is that students can feel empowered to contribute to the educational process. Mid-semester feedback in this paper by Kutzer, the quote is that mid-semester feedback alters the attitude of the students toward the instructor and the teaching process. So this gets back at what we just were talking about on the previous slide. but also students see that their input is important in the collaborative venture of teaching and learning. They feel respected and recognize that they can participate in their own educational process. Another good reason here is that conducting mid-semester feedback can improve instructors' end of semester feedback scores. So a study indicated that there are several observable, non-complicated instructor activities that can be changed in a short period of time to affect student ratings and ultimately learning as well. So specifically, well, in addition to the overall feedback on the course at the end of the semester being higher, there were also specific items which contributed to higher feedback scores. And these included being open to suggestion on tests, discussion, and term paper topics, discussing grading criteria or scheduling assignments further in advance, explaining course objectives, relating assignments to course learning objectives, and clarifying expectations for students. And I expect that some of you maybe feel like you're already doing these things, and that's probably true, but that doesn't, again, that doesn't always mean that students perceive it that way. And so when you take the time to, specifically ask for feedback from students in a way that they feel comfortable contributing to, then you can actually find out maybe what you thought was clear wasn't what the students thought was clear, etc. Now, there are some possible drawbacks, just to be clear, one of which is it does take time. It takes time to write the questions, to administer the survey in class. That takes class time both to administer it and then to address it as well as the time that it takes you to analyze the feedback. There's a possible loss of control if students all suggest something that maybe you didn't want to change, but then you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. Do you change the thing you didn't want to change, or do you ignore the feedback? That is a possibility. There are arguments that feedback in general can cause the entrenchment of traditional teaching methods. You've probably experienced where if you try to do something innovative, sometimes that can feel scary to students, or it can not always go well the first time. And so receiving feedback about that, negative feedback, could cause you to course correct back to a more traditional teaching method, which just causes the perpetuation of those things rather than innovation and more newer evidence-based strategies. There is research, though, showing that maybe this isn't as big of an effect as people fear, but it is an argument. And I think kind of the biggest possible drawback here is that there's an added opportunity for you to receive biased comments. So for example, sexist or racist comments could, it's just another opportunity to receive those, which is very unfortunate and a major drawback. So moving on to how do you administer this mid-semester feedback? So first of all, writing the questions. So effective formative evaluations should be goal-directed with a clear purpose. They should provide feedback that enables actionable revisions, and they should be implemented in a timely manner to enable revisions within the active teaching learning cycle. Formative evaluations are most effective when they are focused on a specific instructional strategy or concern. Focused formative evaluations produced more specific, targeted feedback that is amenable to actionable change. It's a good idea to keep the whole thing short, like 3 to 6 questions maximum for the entire feedback form. I recommend targeting the parts of the course that you have the most ability to change. So if there's something about the course that you are really passionate about and really do not want to change, or maybe you're teaching across multiple sections and everyone's agreed to do it a certain way, don't ask about those things because you don't want to change them. If there's something that you really don't mind changing, or you were just trying out and you're not sure how it's going, those would be great things to ask about. Again, giving that really targeted, those targeted questions will give you targeted responses that you can then use to actually improve. And finally, you want to keep the questions focused on the course, not on you as an instructor. Questions based on instructor personality can definitely contribute to you receiving those comments that are not constructive. And if your questions are focused on the course, you're more likely to receive feedback that is useful rather than just students venting about everything that's not going well. So a few suggested questions. These are all up on the Center for Teaching and Learning website on mid-semester feedback. So I'm not going to read through each of them, but as you'll see, they kind of follow the advice of trying to keep it focused on the course itself, not on instructor personality. And here are some possible additional questions. Again, you're not going to want to include all of these because you want to keep it short, but just pick and choose which ones are most applicable to your specific situation. For administering the forms, you'll want to do that about halfway into the semester. So I'm administering mine now, which is early October. A study by Brownstein did indicate that forms administered 7 to 8 weeks into the semester were more effective than those administered after only 4 weeks. So there is kind of diminishing effects if you administer them too early. You'll definitely want to keep them anonymous in order to encourage as much feedback as possible. You'll also want to give students time in class to fill them out. I always do it at the beginning because if it's at the end, then students might not stay and do it. You'll also want to contextualize what you're doing and why before you administer them. I always kind of share that I'm administering these forms in order to improve my teaching as well as tailor the class to my specific students. So for example, sometimes I have a lot of chemistry majors in a particular section and they really want to know about cutting edge techniques in chemistry research. Sometimes I have a section that's majority pre-med and they want to know how is what we're learning in lab connected to what my future career as a physician will be. And so kind of explaining why I'm administering the forms, I think first of all, can help cut back on those biased comments. You could even share that that bias in student evaluations exists. And if you kind of share a little bit about that, students are less likely to make those biased comments. But again, this adds to the good feeling that students have about you as an instructor and caring about their learning and your abilities as a teacher and improving those. A suggestion that you may want to consider doing this digitally. Digital forms tend to be lengthier than handwritten. It also can facilitate data analysis. If you ask quantitative questions, it's easier to kind of add up that data in a digital format. It also allows absent students to contribute. You can just send them the link to the form. It's just much easier. There's also universal design at play here. If you have a student who needs to fill out the form digitally, then it's already digital. And if you have a student who, for some reason, would need to fill it out by hand, you can just print the form. It's easier to go that direction than the other way. It also improves anonymity. Sometimes you learn students' handwriting over time, and this way, that's not a factor. So options for doing this, you could just use a Google form, you could use Qualtrics, you could even use something like Poll Everywhere, whatever is easiest and makes the most sense to you. Some tips for evaluating the responses. First of all, it's good to take the concerns seriously, but do try to have a thick skin and not take things too personally. And I know that's easier said than done. But keep in mind that there are a lot of reasons that a student might just be having a bad day, and they might just have an opportunity to vent, and it might not even be about you. Additionally, you don't want to let extreme outlier comments get to you. If it's just one student having a bad day, try not to let it affect you too much. Look for themes in the comments. That's what's the most useful. You'll also want to keep an open mind. An aspect of the course that you love or that worked well in the past, or that's supposed to be evidence-based, it just might not be effective for this particular group of students. It's a good idea to get advice from people that you trust. So you could ask a trusted colleague to review the feedback with you, and you could get suggestions from them on your plan of action. CTL staff are available to help with this as well. And remember that earlier study that showed that getting expert consultation on your feedback definitely increased the boost to your teaching that you received. So a trusted colleague or CTL staff are available for that. You'll definitely want to respond to the feedback. If you just collect it, students may feel that like you wasted their time, and that even if you make the changes that they suggest, they might not notice, like they've got a lot going on. So kind of going through the feedback that you received with them and the changes that you intend to make is a very, very worthwhile use of time. But you can respond in the way that feels right for you. You can discuss the survey results with the whole class and set aside time in class to do this. That's what I do. It only takes 5 minutes, maybe 10 if they have questions. If you don't have class time for that, you could prepare an email to the class. You also don't have to share all of the information that you received. If everyone gave different advice and going through each one point by point would take hours, don't do that. Just find a few trends and focus on those. You can also be strategic about the information that you share. So just because one student had this one idea that you don't think is going to work well, you don't have to address every single thing, but you do want to address the big trends. Definitely you want to make sure that students feel like they were heard and that you care. Thank them for giving you feedback. I do this after I collect the forms, and then again when I share my response. Clarify any misunderstandings or questions they might have had. Explain how they can ask for help or get their questions answered. You can present the positive aspects of the course that the students appreciated. Maybe 75% of the class really appreciated some piece of the course, and hearing that, the other 25% may choose to take advantage of a resource or something that they didn't appreciate before. You can also talk about how you'll continue or augment those practices that are going well. You can summarize the negative feedback and describe concrete, specific changes that you will make as a result. Do avoid having a defensive or overly apologetic tone. That's not what this is for. You can document this activity, but do be strategic about what you share with your dean or reappointment promotion committee, if anything. If you get some nice encouragement from your students about your teaching, you can file those notes so you can find them later. You could use this to demonstrate your growth as a teacher by documenting how you responded to any negative feedback and what effect your actions had on students or their learning. But again, this is a chance for you to improve, and you don't need to share anything. No one even needs to know that you're doing this. If you get stuck, CTL staff are available to support faculty in their efforts to enhance their teaching and learning. If you need any help interpreting and acting on the feedback that you receive, or you want to dive deeper into some other aspect of your teaching, we're here to help you enhance your teaching. I want to acknowledge a lot of the research in this presentation was collected by Professor Daryl Young from Harvey Mudd Math, and Dr. Sarah Haller, who is currently the interim director of the CTL. So big thanks to both of them. A lot of the information in this presentation came from them. Thank you for your attention. And again, I'm Sadie Otte, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or if you want to learn more. Thank you.